Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred. And in today's reading from Martha Sweezy's Internal Family Systems Therapy for Shame and Guilt, I am going to give some examples of how people experience their parts in different sensory ways. So sometimes people experience it more in their bodies, kinesthetically, somatically. Sometimes people see their parts visually. Sometimes people have more of an oral sense of them, they hear the parts or they hear what they're saying. It can be any combination of those. Sometimes some parts are more visual, some parts are more somatic. Sometimes it's just a felt sense or like a knowing of what the part is or how it feels or where it is in or around the body. So these are some really great examples where Martha is exploring this with her clients. So she says, ask the client if they're visual. If not, explore how they experience their parts. Maybe they sense, feel, or hear parts rather than seeing them. And there's no right or wrong way to experience parts. Ask them to describe parts according to their experience and inquire about the age of each part as it comes up. So here are two examples. This is Frankie, who experiences their parts visually, orally, and kinesthetically. The therapist says, so tell me, Frankie, how do you become aware of a part? Frankie says, sometimes I see it, sometimes I feel it, sometimes I hear it speak, or I just notice what it's doing. The therapist says, and how do you know that what you feel is a part? Frankie says, at first I don't, but if I pay attention and I ask questions, it becomes clear. The therapist says, what kind of questions do you ask? Frankie says, I might ask a sensation or a feeling. What do you want me to know? If there's no answer, I ask, is this a part? The therapist says, and what if you get no answer to both of those questions? Frankie shrugs. Yeah, with sensations, I might go more toward, this is just a physical body thing. The therapist says, do you ever talk over body things with your body? You can talk to your body too, just like you talk to parts. Frankie says, that's a good idea. Like, I do get migraines and no part ever takes responsibility for them. So this is interesting. You can have parts that take responsibility. They say, I am using your body for this reason. I'm creating pain or fatigue or different symptoms. Other times there will be no part that claims responsibility, but you'll still have a lot of parts who have reaction to whatever's happening in your body, as you'll see in this example. So the therapist says, do you want to ask your body about it, about these migraines? And Frankie says, yes, and closes their eyes. They say, someone is saying, keep experimenting. The headaches are bad. So this is a part who's having an opinion about the headaches. The therapist says, well, how do you understand that, Frankie? Frankie says, yeah, I got discouraged and I gave up. My partner keeps encouraging me to try new things, but I just don't. I guess I have a part who agrees with my partner. The therapist says, what kind of things should you try? Frankie says, green light, Botox, omega-3s, stuff like that. The therapist says, so no part of you claims responsibility for the headaches, but you're noticing a part who discouraged you from trying new things. Why does it discourage you? Frankie says, I guess it doesn't want me to feel disappointed. The therapist says, how do you notice that part? Frankie says, that part is in my thoughts. And then the therapist goes on, how do you feel toward it? Right. So we're getting curious about the parts who are having response to the physical issue. But there can also be parts who use the body to create anxiety through the nervous system or pain or fatigue, like I said. So here's another example of Cora, who experiences her parts kinesthetically or somatically and orally, so not visually. The therapist says, do you see the anxious part? Cora says, no, I feel it in my stomach and my shoulders get tense. The therapist says, how do you feel toward it when you notice it in your stomach and in your shoulders? Cora says, I would like to be a more relaxed person. The therapist says, what's the worst thing about being anxious? So there's another part, right, who doesn't like the anxiety. So the therapist is trying to get at like at the concerns of that part. What's the worst thing about being anxious? Cora says, I think everything and I second guess myself. Like the minute I do something, I doubt my decision. The therapist says, so thinking and doubting are features of your anxiety? Cora says, well, maybe they're first, and then comes the anxiety in my stomach. The therapist says, meaning there's a thinking, doubting part and an anxious part. So the therapist is listening, right? Cora is talking like I, blending with the different parts. And the therapist is trying to get curious about the parts. And is this one part? Is it two separate parts? And Cora says yes, that there's two parts, the thinking, doubting part and the anxious part. And the therapist says, do you hear the thinking, doubting part? Cora says yes. She said, but you feel the anxious part in your stomach and your shoulders. Cora says yes. So the therapist says, great, it's good for us to know how your parts communicate with you. So Frankie, the first example, has a multisensory experience of their parts. Cora feels and hears her parts rather than seeing them. She says, in my experience, the IFS approach to therapy is somewhat quicker and easier if clients are internally visual, but there is no right or wrong way to communicate inside. What's important is noticing and engaging with one's own experience. So all of these examples illustrate some element of stage setting as a way of facilitating therapy. So you as the practitioner are getting used to how the different parts of the person communicate and also helping the person understand that. Because when you know, oh, when I feel this in my belly and my shoulders, it's this anxious part. You get to know more attributes, just like you do with another person, and you recognize them, and if the part tells you their name, you can say, ooh, Linda, whatever, I see you. Oh, you're so anxious. Tell me what you want me to know. And I think that was a beautiful question that Frankie asks the parts. What do you want me to know? It seems like a simple question, simple open-ended question, but it's a wonderful question if you genuinely feel curious and open to receive the answer from the part. Oh my goodness, I see you. What do you want me to know? Right? It says, I'm here. I'm listening. Tell me. So I wanted to give that example because parts can show up in so many different ways. And again, there's no right or wrong. It's just being open and curious and observant. So tell me in the comments if that was helpful to you, or maybe how you experience your parts.